Welcome to Koi's Corner, a channel for personal and spiritual growth. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, subscribe, and leave me a comment letting me know. Now, if you are on this video, if you have arrived here watching this, you are a seeker, a spiritual seeker who is trying to figure out how to start their journey, how to begin this spiritual conquest to the soul, diving within. You could be religious, you might be agnostic, you might even be an atheist, but regardless, you are here trying to better yourself however you can, and this video might just happen to be one of those ways. Because that's what the spiritual path is. It is a path into living a more integrated life, a more positive life, a more emotionally available life, a more sympathetic life, and a life that addresses the vastness of the cosmos that we perceive ourselves to exist within. And so, with that being said, we must start with the most important statement in spiritual life, and that is the understanding that your life as it is right now and the spiritual path itself are not two separate things. This is one of the biggest misinterpretations of spirituality that I see personally with people I meet and teach to, is that they think there is their life and there is their spiritual life, and that they must kind of lead double lives while they are learning and awakening. But this is incorrect. The true nature of spirituality is integrating it with the life we already live and making a singular path out of it. The life path is the spiritual path. They are synonymous, and this will always be the case. Because the benefit of understanding this is that we will see as we go forward with these steps, as we are taught in Hinduism, as we are taught in Buddhism with the Eightfold Path, which I have a video on up here, every action in life, how we talk, how we think, what we do, why we work for what we work for, is our intention love or money, are part of spiritual progress, are part of the spiritual journey. And then we have to integrate spiritual thinking, spiritual awareness into these daily actions so that everything we do, from working to cooking to cleaning, can be spiritual actions as well. Our life path becomes the spiritual path, and the spiritual path becomes synonymous with the life path. Or even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna makes sure to make Arjuna, his disciple, aware that there are two selves. There is the true self, which is the eternal nature of what we are, and there is the ego self, which lives in duality. It lives in illusion of spiritual and material as separate, but in reality they both connect into the one. And along with this, coming to understand our spiritual path, we move on to the second tip that we can use to grow, and that is coming into understanding that there is no singular spiritual path. There is no one way to have a spiritual path, and that is, like I said, why this video that I am giving to you right now can be different from any other video or book on a spiritual path. They are always going to be different, and your path will be different than your best friend's spiritual path or your loved one's spiritual path. It will always be unique to us because we live out as an individual within our own mind. Ramakrishna would often say that different creeds and religions are simply different paths to reach the same God, and that is what spirituality is. It is different roads leading to the same destination of universal oneness, of realization of our place as part of this cosmic existence as a whole. And that's why spirituality is beautiful. You can do what you do in your life. You can be an individual, but so long as you remember to keep your mind on oneness, on love, on compassion, and associate with this spiritual awareness, your individual path can still be a spiritual path just as much as anyone else's can. You don't have to lose yourself to gain the world. You can combine both if you do so correctly and in the right way, for the right reasons. The third step in coming to start our spiritual journey is not to identify with any one path that we might find. Like we just said, we can be an individual and our path might always be different, but we in our ego as humans always like to identify as something. We want to identify as black or white, as a Republican, as a liberal, as a Democrat, as a conservative, as a Christian, or as a Hindu. That is the nature of the ego. It wants to have a title. So with spirituality, we often fall into the same line of thinking accidentally. We might find Buddhism and the philosophies of it to work for us and go, well, there we go, I'm a Buddhist. Or we might find Christian mysticism to work for us, and then we drop into the role of, that's me, a spiritual Christian. And when we do this, when we pick up a role spiritually, we become identified with it and we get into a state of cognitive dissonance. We don't want to listen to anything else that might work because now I'm stuck in this role. Now I have this job and I have to stick to it. So remember, as your spiritual journey goes, use these traits and use these pieces of advice for spiritual life that you find all across the world, but don't identify with the one until you really have done enough research. It can take years. I know for myself, I identified as Buddhist for years and years and years. And by doing so, I cut myself off from a lot of other wisdom I could have learned in that time. Only when I opened up about 2 years ago to these new influences from other different ancient texts and religions did I really start to evolve a lot more into my own practice. So you should do the same. Ramana Maharshi always said, be as you are. And what you are is thisness. You are just floating. You aren't any one thing. Be as you are doesn't mean be as a title or be as an identity. It means just be. Let what comes come, let what goes go. That is the spiritual path, and that is how we grow when we are starting. Not by picking one thing and sticking to it, but by taking in everything and letting go what does not serve us and does not allow us to grow. The fourth step, and the hardest one for us to get as we begin our spiritual journey, is to understand, and you must understand this, that in the long run, you don't get anything from spirituality. You get nothing. The ego starts to become spiritual, and you are trying to become spiritual right now, as I once did, and as everyone around the planet does when starting the journey, because the ego wants to gain something. The ego wants to be more peaceful. It wants to be more understanding. It wants to get along better. It has wants, and it wants spirituality to give into the ego to provide for it what it seeks in this practice. After all, you wouldn't be beginning a spiritual path if you didn't think there was some sort of outcome you could gain. And that's the paradox. With spirituality, we begin with intention in mind. We begin with expectation. But the more we evolve internally, the more we release those expectations and can fall into a state of being as we are once again, allowing what influences us to do so, but not expecting anything from it. And that's the goal. That's important to remember, because if we can see that we aren't going to gain anything from this, we won't have expectations going in. And when we can let go of our expectations, the spiritual path, no matter how long it takes, months or years for us to begin an awakening, can never let us down. It can never disappoint us. It will always be providing for us because we are allowing it to do so at the rate in which it sees fit. Chogyam Trungpa, a Tibetan Buddhist who is part of a very, very highly regarded spiritual lineage, always said that enlightenment is the ego's biggest disappointment. Because enlightenment is merely the recognition that everything is already perfect, that wow, it's already all here. It's not some big shebang, it's not some giant emotional overwhelming occurrence, it's just recognizing it as it truly is. And that is what we must remember, and that is what you must know, especially when beginning this journey. The fifth step is remembering that the spiritual path is not just mental. It's not just within the mind and soul, but it's emotional and physical too. It has to do with the physical body, this vessel which houses our conscious experience, and the way in which we perceive spiritual practice and the world at large emotionally, how we empathize, how we sympathize, how we perceive apathy, sadness, depression, excitement. All of our perceptions, both physically and emotionally, also play into spiritual practice, especially after all, since we are in this vessel, why not, if we are in this physical vessel, if we don't learn how to control the vessel, how are we going to allow the soul to float and act freely through it? We just can't. When our body is in shambles, it will obviously and always pull our mind into shambles as well. But when we have a healthy body and a healthy emotional state, we can have a healthy mind tenfold. And that is why those who do awaken almost always are in at least decent or great physical shape, growing into themselves, taking care of themselves, because they recognize the importance of this trinity, this union between the mind, the body, and the emotions that encompass the soul and allow us to grow from it. In this notion, Adi Shankaracharya once said the following: knowing that I am different from the body, I need not neglect the body. It is a vehicle that I use to transact with the world. It is the temple which houses the Atman within. And by Atman, he simply means the universal oneness within. So if I take care of my temple, I can spend more time in the temple, worshiping and understanding my true nature. The sixth step, again simple, is throwing out expectations and knowing that you cannot in any way force growth. There is no timeline that you can ever set for how spiritual or how much understanding you will have by any date on a calendar. You cannot do this. If you set expectations, you will disappoint yourself, and by disappointing yourself, aka the ego, it will push you away from spirituality completely. So don't have any expectations. Don't have any idea of when you will get a certain thing or of how fast you should be in this spiritual state. That's just you identifying with spirituality, and we need not do this. You can't force growth. And the final step is accepting that you will fail and that you will fall. But the spiritual path all depends on how much you can distance yourself from identifying with these failures and continue to get back up off the ground and walk your path and follow your dharma. That is the key to spirituality, is knowing that I am not going to be perfect just because I'm trying to start my spiritual path right now. I'm going to say things that hurt people. I'm going to act in ways that are selfish. I'm going to disappoint myself and my family and my friends. That is part of life, is making mistakes and learning from them. Just because I am becoming more spiritual and awakening to my true nature doesn't mean these things will never happen again. They will. We are not infallible. So the difference is, are you going to let these mistakes push you off your path forever, or are you going to use them as fuel to your eternal flame within, to the soul, to say, you know what, I see where I'm messing up. I will use that as education and take that knowledge with me as I transcend my path and as I walk down it. If we can do this, if we can use our mistakes as fuel for progression, you will be fine. You will be fine, forever forward. But if you use those mistakes, identify with them, and let them bring you down, the spiritual path will never open itself up to you. A lotus flower can't bloom if we are trying to bombard it with water and fire and heat and bugs. It needs that space to breathe, to allow things to flow naturally so that it can bloom too. And that really is the key to starting your spiritual journey and beginning this progress towards a better you, a better soul, and a better self in totality, as you come to notice your place within and as the cosmos. So hopefully this video can help you guys out. If you have any questions, please feel free to like, subscribe, and leave those down below. I would love to assist you. And as always, I will see you guys next time. Ram Ram.